Halamoana Exiles, we had a phenomenal interview the other day with Wudijo, an ARPG creator who plays lots of Diablo, lots of other games like Last Epoch, and Path of Exile, who was able to actually interview Jonathan Rogers, the Path of Exile 2 game director. So without further ado, we're going to pop right into the summary of that interview, although I heavily encourage you to go check out the original on Wudijo's channel. That will be in the video description. Let's get to it. So Wudijo actually did a phenomenal job with this interview because he broke it down into sections and was very clear about how he was going to do that. He even, in his video description, laid out the various chapters of each section, which is great. That's something that other interviewers haven't done in the past, and I greatly appreciate. So let's get right to the first one, which was about the Endgame and Leagues of Path of Exile 2. This part of the interview had a lot of back and forth between Jonathan and Woody, speaking about what Path of Exile 2's initial endgame will look like. Jonathan confirmed that the initial endgame will definitely feature a lot less than the current Path of Exile 1, but pinnacle bosses are confirmed for Path of Exile 2 when it launches. Now, these will be probably coming in throughout the actual beta of Path of Exile 2, so when that launches on June 7th, 2024, save the date everybody, we won't actually be able to access all of the pinnacle bosses. We're not going to have the Shaper, the Eater of Worlds, the Maven, and all those versions of those bosses in POE2 right when it comes into our grasp, but they'll slowly pepper in to the game. They next touched on the topics of leagues and endgames of leagues in Path of Exile 2, and whether or not Path of Exile 2 will launch with a league. Now, as we all know, we've touched on this a few times already, so Jonathan said the same thing. They don't know if the launch will contain a league. It depends on how big the regular endgame is and whether or not they have the bandwidth to actually launch with a league. The 1.0 release just might be the base game available to everybody out there and not just the beta testers, which is completely reasonable, and we know they want to be on that 3-month cadence to sell as many supporter packs as possible and to get as much hype building up in Path of Exile 2 as possible. You know, every 3 months is basically a new release for Path of Exile 1 right now. Those player counts skyrocket. Everybody gets super excited on the forums, on Reddit, and just in the gaming scene in general. So they're going to try to prop that up as much as possible when POE2 releases. Additionally, their approach to leagues won't be changing that much when it comes to Path of Exile 2, but they definitely don't want to alienate players with a completely new game experience with every single season. Seasons are going to be much like they are in Path of Exile 1, where it's going to add a good bit of side content to the game. In something like the current season with the Wildwood, you don't need to interact with it. It's side content. You go into the thicket, you blow up all these monsters, you cause the wisps to imbue your map entirely, but it's all optional. You don't need to do it, even though everybody wants their hands on those juicy, juicy charms and the beautiful That Which Was Taken jewel. Additionally, it sounds like they will be going back to the system of larger leagues than a smaller league with a single huge expansion once per year, which is super good to hear. That was always a hype time around Christmas or late December, early January, wherein we were all able to bundle up and experience Rayclast together. Hopping on over to some class-related stuff very briefly, they have absolutely no plans to expand classes past the current 12, but there is a chance they will add more ascendancies in the distant future. We know that Path of Exile 2 launches with 12 classes and 36 ascendancy classes. That's 3 ascendancies per class. That's already a huge amount and basically double what we have currently in Path of Exile 1. So there's going to be a lot to balance and really a lot for us to build, which is super hype. Plus, as we all know, Scions, rest in peace. Scions are gone in Path of Exile 2, though they will stay in Path of Exile 1. And we actually got this little cool tidbit. Something similar to cross-class gameplay is going to actually be possible in Path of Exile 2, but of course, Jonathan said, we're going to wait a little bit before we touch on the rest of this. We will talk about it when the full passive tree is showcased. Now, what he means here, I'm kind of uncertain. Is this meaning that we're going to actually be able to path into other ascendancy classes? Because, of course, cross-class play already exists because we all share the same passive skill tree. This is an interesting one, and this might bode for some greater changes when it comes to POE2's skill tree, which we should be seeing within the next 4 months, everybody. Okay, now we're swapping to some talk about the beta and the alpha, of which I guess there's an alpha coming up for the craziest players among us. I think he said actually the most ridiculous players will have access to a closed alpha, which will have an NDA, probably so they can just hammer themselves against the game for endless hours for a few weeks before everybody gets broad beta access. I'd assume that's coming up within the next 2 months, maybe? I'd not say the next month, probably the next 2 months, because they are opening up the alpha servers for 3.24, as we learned in this interview, imminently. That'll give the Path of Exile 2 closed alpha testers some time, a decent chunk of time, before the masses get access in June. We also learned some stuff about the closed beta, which is starting on June 7th. It's going to be insanely hard because they can always tune the difficulty down. Doing that is far easier than tuning the difficulty up once people have experienced the easiness of an easy game. Additionally, the Path of Exile 2 development team would absolutely love to release Path of Exile 2 in 2024, and 6 months, that's a sweet spot of time as long as all goes swell. So if the closed beta happens from June to December with a launch in December, that'd be awesome. But they reiterated they will only launch the game when they feel ready to send it out. Plus, as soon as that beta finishes, the game is just gonna launch. There's not gonna be a delay. There's not gonna be, oh, okay, well, we're gonna launch in 2 or 3 months time. We're closing everything down. No, the beta servers will just seamlessly swap to the actual launch servers. Now, of course, there is a chance that your characters will not be playable from beta in the actual launch version, and they reserve the complete right to delete those characters, all their accomplishments and items whenever they want to. This, after all, did happen with Path of Exile's original launch back in 2013. They can delete all your items, they can delete all your characters, and really, during the beta itself, while you're playing your characters, they said, yeah, we're probably gonna brick a ton of builds, a ton of items, as we fix broken stuff and highlight new things. So while you're in the beta, it's not like a normal Path of Exile league, wherein the changes are going to come at the end of that period. They are going to come all throughout. You could log in one day, be blasting maps in POE2's Endgame with this crazy broken rampage bear form build, and the next day you get in, and you have been nerfed to the ground and you need to swap over to the Wolf or Roa form build to actually deal some substantial damage. Now that's a world we might be living in quite soon. One final note on the actual beta, they sincerely want, according to Jonathan Rogers, Path of Exile 2's beta to feel like they're playing a finished game, like the full release of Diablo 4 or of Last Epoch or even Path of Exile 1. They are putting a ton of time, effort, and energy into making this a reality, and we're gonna see soon enough whether or not they succeeded. Okay, then there was a huge section about the trade system in Path of Exile 2, which we learned about in the Zizarin interview. We essentially learned that there will be some sort of pseudo auction house that won't feel like an auction house, where you can list items for currency, and both players will be taxed a certain gold value. And remember, gold is account bound. It cannot be traded between players in the slightest, and it definitely won't be bought from some sort of auction house MTX store that GGG hosts. Not gonna happen, people. Jonathan stressed a few things in this interview with Wudijo. First, he said the instant buyout system definitely should not feel like an auction house. There is no way that you should think you're playing something like Guild Wars 2 when you're using this. And we kind of find out why, because it does not sound like it's going to be in the game itself. This system will still be using the POE trade website that is set up by Grinding Gear Games. They also want to keep pushing regular player-to-player trade. That's not going away, like I predicted. Some people in the comments of my trade is insane in Path of Exile 2 video said, oh, there's no way that regular player-to-player trade will still exist. It definitely will. This leads to the fact that what if people will try to forego the gold fee by just pinging a person who has something listed on the auction house and saying, hey, we can just get rid of that gold fee. Maybe I'll pay a premium and we can just trade it player to player. What do you feel about that? That's a big possibility, and I could see that happening with PoE players because they are so conscious about the worth of their characters and their account. Woody then asked a little question trying to peek at whether or not PoE2 will learn a little bit more from Last Epoch and make SSF even more accessible, and Jonathan basically said, no, we're not going to do that. There's no way that we're going to do this. They are not going to bake increase drop rates or anything like that into SSF because of the plans that Last Epoch have for their trading systems. Okay, then there was a section about keyboard movement. It's very tiny, but it was an interesting one. First up, Jonathan and Woody are really enjoying the fact that keyboard movement is going to be in Path of Exile 2, and we're talking WASD here, especially apparently Woody said after testing it in Diablo 4. Yes, remember D4 just got WASD movement in its latest update. Very cool for them, and Path of Exile 2 is going to launch with that as well. Remember, it's probably not going to be coming to Path of Exile 1 though. It's something that was only really possible with all the huge shakeups and skills, animations, and everything else that they're doing with Path of Exile 2. Okay, we actually have some crafting talk here as well. Jonathan really wants to encourage players to craft more. He confirmed, again, that a crafting bench is in the game, and there are plenty of other crafting mechanics as well. However, there are no certain types. He didn't dive into what exactly the crafting bench was like, but there will certainly be changes from Path of Exile 1, and he didn't tell us which types of crafting from POE 1 will be coming to POE 2. Could it be essences? Could it be harvest? I doubt it. I don't think he likes the current implementation of harvest. Could it be fossils? I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. Jonathan loves delve, so I bet fossils will be in POE 2 in some way, shape, or form. Additionally, he stressed this huge fact that currency rerolling is not going to be a thing in POE 2. They want you to feel the weight of every use of your currency items. They want it to feel meaningful. They want it to feel meaningful. They want it to provide value to your gameplay experience, not where in Path of Exile 1 where you can spend a 30-minute session rolling 5,000 alterations on a base type. That's not going to happen in Path of Exile 2, and it's not just because alterations are gone, it's because the entire currency crafting system will be altered. Woody brought up a great point about map re-rolling with currencies. Oh, well, they're thinking about that right now. They're not sure how that's going to operate because, as you all know, there are certain map mods in POE 1 that can completely brick your build. We don't want that happening in Path of Exile 2, especially with the way Chaos Orbs seem to function, where they remove a mod, then add a mod. It's really hard to get rid of that certain mod that's on your item if you're removing a mod, then adding a mod, and you can't scour. Remember, scouring orbs are gone in Path of Exile 2. When you get an item to magic or rare, it's staying at that value. It is not going back to normal. Next up was a beefy section on lessons from other games, and with that we're probably gonna go with Diablo 4 being the focus of this entire section, even though there were hints toward Last Epoch as well. First up, Jonathan acknowledged if competitors are forming their games in a certain manner, they are probably going to adapt their own game if other people seriously seem to like the manner in which that other game is going. We can look to Last Epoch and their trade system as a pure example there. However, something like Diablo 4's open world, I don't think that's something that PoE would want to adopt. I don't think it was received very well. Then there were, of course, some shots fired from Jonathan at Diablo 4. He knows that PoE 1, I think, and 2 combat feels better than Diablo 4's combat. He also expressed the fact that he and the rest of the Path of Exile 1 and 2 teams know how to maintain a game in the long term far more than the current Diablo 4 development team. That's 100% accurate. They've already been doing it for 13 years. 13 years of live service is far different than a newbie team, right? In this manner, we can definitely compare Diablo 4 and Path of Exile and say that one has it way better than the other. And that's the Path of Exile team, because they are so well versed in doing this, and the D4 team is not. Just look at Diablo 3. Just look at Diablo 2. Those were not catered to at all in the long term, whereas Path of Exile, it definitely has been. Jonathan then kind of said Path of Exile will always be catered to and focusing on single player experiences first and foremost, not really fully focusing on party play, even though that should be a part of the game. And that makes sense. This is where PoE thrives. This is why I love the game. I'm able to play it, drop it whenever. There's no daily systems. There's no world bosses. There's no need for me to get into another group and interact with a ton of people. I can play the game at my leisure, and that is phenomenal. You can't do that with some modern games today. Okay, there was a huge section now on quality of life life changes that I am just going to fly through really quickly. A lot of it was discussing item filters and essentially how Path of Exile 2 is not going to have a true item filter built into the game. That's still going to be a community-driven feature. You're still going to rely on Neversink and all those other creators to make awesome loot filters. So skipping on over that right now, we're going to look at some other quality of life changes, including gold automatically being picked up. 100% that's going to happen, everybody. That happened in the base Path of Exile 2 experience. It's going to keep happening, and there's no pets involved. Everybody, 0 pets. Jonathan also touched on the pickup radius, and we know that that will be changing in Path of Exile 2. However, modifiers to it on items or on the passive skill tree are not planned for the game currently. All the pickup radius changes will be implicit in the game itself. In this section, Jonathan also confirmed that the Wildwood is not currently going core in 3.24, so there's going to be a lot less loot. So in Path of Exile 1, there's going to be a lot less loot anyway. Additionally, Path of Exile 2's inventory will work exactly the same as Path of Exile 1's inventory. You still have the inventory Tetris going on. You still have the same number of slots, which honestly is great to see. I like that investment and involvement in the game. I don't like having 1 slot equals 1 item. I like being able to see the actual value and weight of the items in my inventory. I know that's a hateful take and it's going to get me crap, but I just like the feel better. Jonathan also actually said, and this kind of sucks, he is perfectly fine with people using lots of out-of-game clients. It's okay. You can do that. There's no plans to integrate a lot of that stuff into the game itself, and they can't force players to not use them. So those are probably going to be a part of the Path of Exile 2 community. However, they are going to try to be more teaching with the tooltips in Path of Exile 2. He pointed to Baldur's Gate 3, if I remember correctly from the interview, and said they have great tooltips, and Path of Exile 2 is going to try to sculpt theirs like Larian did with BG3. All right, finishing up, the interview rounded out with a bunch of viewer questions that Woody asked Jonathan Rogers. We're just gonna shoot through them very quickly. Jonathan said the situation about ultra-wide screens is perfectly okay on their end. Obviously, this is not the case with a lot of people who hate the black bars that appear on ultra wide PC screens. They'll also be looking at crossplay between console and PC at a later time. This is further confirmation that it's probably going to happen. There are just a lot of moving parts going on here. Additionally, as we already know, there's no changes to the guild system currently planned. There are 0 plans for something that will increase the luck the more and more you have bad luck, so you slowly work your way up to actually getting a success. Super big fan of that. There's no pseudo random systems that are coming to POE2. We also know that the Mirror of Kalandra is going to be staying as rare as it is in Path of Exile 1, and it also confirms for those people who thought the Mirror wouldn't be in POE2, it's going to be there, everyone. Someone also asked about skipping the campaign on secondary characters in POE2. That's not happening. Jonathan said it again. And finally, the big one, everyone, a viewer question. The respec system has actually been changed in Path of Exile 2. They think it is now going to cost gold, account-bound gold, to respec passives. Regret orbs may or may not stay in the game. This is a massive change, everyone, and they have changed their stance on it officially, just like the trading system changes. They're making a lot of alterations based on community feedback. This ideally should be good, right? But we are approaching that slippery slope. First, gold as a currency was only going to be used with vendors. Now it's going to be used in the auction house to tax the buyer and the seller. Now it's also going to be used to respec your characters. And how exactly is this going to work? If you can't farm up enough gold, that means you're just going to be stuck on your build. What are the various systems of gold intake going to look like? Is it just killing monsters? Will you be forced back to lower tier maps if you bricked your build with the passive tree that you decided to take? There are a lot of questions that this opens up here, and a lot of problems that grinding your games is going to need to solve, most definitely. There is a reason that the regret orb system actually has worked decently well, even though it is a huge barrier of entry for new players. In the end game, it allows for a ton of freedom with respecing your build. Now that there's gold that will probably scale with character level or number of passives allocated, it's gonna be a whole new game. And that's it, everybody. Huge thanks to Wudijo for having that interview with Jonathan Rogers, and a big thanks to GGG for continuing to talk to the community. Even if they're not on Reddit answering questions, it's great that they are talking to various individuals throughout the ARPG community. Here's to more interviews in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to subscribe and like it if you did, to spread it to others across this vast expanse of YouTube. Anyways, that's all for this one. Talamoana, Exiles.